Okay, I think we'll get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our second STInG chat session, which we're calling Securing Funding, Tips and Tricks for Investigator Grants. And it's great to have all of you here. So my name's Andrew Forbes from Monash University. I'm co-hosting this session with Kate Lee from the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Big wave, Kate, to your Dory fans. And welcome to session. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands which we're all meeting. For Kate and me, it's the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. So just before we get started, I'll give a little background about STInG, which I think you'll all know about, and a bit about what we want these STInG chat sessions to accomplish. So the STInG in STInG chat is the statistics in trials interest groups of the Australian Clinical Trials Alliance. And obviously you're all here because you're members of STInG. So the main objective of STInG is really to provide a community of practice, or professional development support and just community support, and to strengthen links amongst clinical trials statisticians across Australia. So for our STInG chat session, so we had the first one in around August of last year about tips for building a career as a clinical trial statistician, whereas our session today is going to be a panel-style discussion about tips and tricks for securing funding for investigator grants. So that means funding for you yourselves. So that could be a journey that might traverse some pretty rocky roads with bruises, punctures, and self-doubt, and some of you it may not. But hopefully, eventually, you'll reach the highest of highs. So our conversation today is going to be with two biostatisticians, who I'll get Kate to introduce in a moment, who have recently been down those paths, and hopefully we'll be able to get some insight into their secrets for success. So I'll hand over to Kate now, and she'll talk about the format of the session and introduce the panelists. Okay, across to you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate. I'm a senior biostatistician at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and I co-lead the Access STInG group with Andrew. So we're very lucky today to have two excellent statisticians with us. We've got Jessica Kasza. So Jess is a professor in biostatistics in the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine at Monash Uni. She was awarded an NHMRC Level 1 Investigator Grant just a few months ago to develop, translate, and implement biostatistical expertise in stepped wedge trials. So a year or two ago, she was the president of the Statistical Society of Australia. And at Monash University, she leads the Cluster, which is a group of researchers interested in all things to do with cluster randomized trials, including the stepped wedge trial, which is really her baby. She regularly collaborates with international leaders in methodology for these designs, and she also is a statistician in applied trials, cluster randomized trials. So welcome, Jess. And then we've also got Kristy Robledo. So Kristy is a senior research fellow and future leading fellow at the NHMRC Clinical Trials Centre at the University of Sydney. She was awarded her Emerging Leadership Level 1 grant again a couple of months ago, which starts in 2025, and she'll be working on methods and applications for risk prediction models for time to event data. So Kristy's worked at the Trial Centre for over 16 years now, but only moved to more of an academic appointment after being awarded a PhD in 2018. She collaborates and advises on a number of phase 2 and phase 3 trials across an array of clinical areas, from neonatal medicine, oncology, cardiovascular medicine, and she's even worked with convicted criminals. So maybe she'll tell us a bit more about that later on. So the format of today, Andrew and I have pre-prepared a number of questions for Jess and Kristy. We'd also encourage you to ask your own questions. It's a bit of a fluid chat session. So if you do want to ask either of the two panelists a question, we're using the Q&A function. So you can find the Q&A button at the bottom right of your screen. If you can't find it, there's 3 little dots, click on that and the Q&A function you'll be able to see it. So if you ask your questions in there, Andrew and I will keep an eye on the chat and we'll ask them as you go along. And just to say, this session is being recorded, so it will be available for yourselves or your colleagues at a later date if you want to watch it then. So let's get started. I'm going to start by asking both of our panelists just to tell us a bit about your career to date and when you started planning your investigator grant application. So we might start with Jess and then we'll move on to Kristy.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks to you and Andrew for having me along this afternoon to chat about this. So I have, I completed my PhD at the University of Adelaide back in 2010. And after that, I moved around a little bit before ending up at Monash in 2013. And I've been there ever since. I started out my career quite interested in theoretical statistics. I wasn't interested in applications of statistics to anything. It was only after my PhD and sort of really when I came to Monash that I saw the great benefit of working very closely with clinicians and with people who actually use the statistics that we develop. So that's kind of my career to date. I started working in stepped wedge trials and cluster randomized trials in about 2017, I think. My planning for my investigator grant application, well, it started in 2019, really. That was the year I first applied for an investigator grant. Wasn't successful the second time I applied, wasn't successful the third time I applied, and then fourth time I applied, I was lucky enough to be successful. So it's been a very long process for me.
Thanks, Jess. We know these can be very hard to get. So try again. It's all very dependent on the panelists, and there's a bit of luck in there too. But congratulations, Kristy. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I kind of fell into medical statistics in a way. I actually did agricultural statistics at university and then couldn't find a job in biometry. I managed to get a job at the Trials Centre, and so worked for quite a while as a professional statistician, did the Masters of Biostatistics, and then ended up doing a PhD that ended in 2018. And then that's when I got my academic appointment as well at the Trials Centre. So I've been maybe a bit lazy and haven't really moved around at all, Jess. Stayed where I'm happy and comfortable at the Trials Centre for over 16 years now. And I guess I was working in trials while I was doing my PhD as well, that 1 day a week or whatever that you're allowed to work when you have a full-time PhD allocation. And I've had a few maternity breaks since I graduated from my PhD in 2018. And then last year, I was awarded this Future Leader Fellow. And that's when I really started thinking about doing more than just applying statistics and doing a bit more, of what I did in my PhD. I liked it. I want to do a little bit more methods. So I've really come from the applied side, I feel. And now, thought about applying last year, probably in January, and then put an application in last year, and N of 1 was successful. So I don't know maybe it was EL1, right, Jess? I've heard the valley of death there in the middle that you want to avoid.
Look, I the first time I applied at EL2. Then I tried my luck at EL1. Was absolutely slammed in that application, and then I went to L1. So I think a lot of skill there, Kristy.
Yeah.
First go.
Yeah. So maybe the choice of where you fit, what bin you fit in, is maybe one of the hardest choices to make. Yeah.
I was going to say, I agree with that. There's a member of my team here who's kind of on the borderline of EL1 and EL2. And if you go for EL1, you can't big yourself up too much because then it puts you in EL2. But at the same time, you need to big yourself up because it's a grant application. So I think you're right, Kristy, thinking about that level and really justifying that level is pretty important.
Yeah, and I was technically eligible for it because of my maternity leave, but then I probably got to have gone for EL2 if I wanted to, but maybe it was safer staying where I was, and it played out for me.
And that's the kind of thing it's worth chatting around and getting some feedback from others in the field, your grants office, whoever else. All right, over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, no, interesting to see. So Kristy successful on the first attempt. That means the only way is downwards from here, Kristy.
I'll never apply again, right? After they changed the name of the application.
Fantastic to be able to get it first time up. And Jess, you know, you're a great example of persistence pays off. So yeah, it's really great both got them. Actually, I'll start with Kristy this time. It's an incredibly daunting application process. So can you walk us through how you got started with it, especially with all the impact sections?
Yeah, and I guess this is probably really fresh in my memory because I just did the first time. So this was my first ever CIA grant application that I've ever written. And I attended all of the workshops that the university provided, but the grants office said that as a first-time applicant, they have no additional feedback that they can provide me because I have no feedback from reviewers. So that was really, really helpful. So I had asked around. I'd been in the Statistical Society's mentorship program and had been paired with a fantastic mentor who provided me with her successful application at a much higher level than what I was going for, but kind of gave me where methodological grants sit. So Sydney University also has a grant repository. I think a lot of universities have them, of successful applications of the people who choose to put their, tick the box to allow their application to go in there, but not a lot of methodological applications and, stats methods. I don't think I found any in Sydney Uni. So it was really grateful to get that. And I asked a few other successful applicants for theirs as well to kind of get where I should be going. And then I started trawling through Scopus and altmetrics and SciVal and learning all of these rabbit holes to go down. So I would highly advise to book an appointment with your librarian if you have access to one, and like kind of gain some skills in where to spend your time and if they can even look up for you. Because for each of those top 10 publications, you kind of go into the citations and then the citations of the citations and go down these, pathways of trying to pull all of these metrics together and find where it's been used. So that was and then of course, because it's 70% about you and how amazing you are, which was really hard for me to write. I got a full application to get draft application together for that. And then I started doing the rounds with people to review and provide feedback. So a few statisticians, a lot of clinicians, a lot of senior researchers here at the Trials Centre, that some of who have experience sitting as reviewers for, I don't think it was EL1s they review for, it was a bit higher up, but that was really helpful to get some feedback from people who review applications.
And how long before the deadline did you start preparing your application? Because I know they've just opened now to the next round, which two of you don't have to worry about, of course.
So last year, I think it opened in mid-September. And I think by the end of September, I had a whole draft ready and was starting to share that to people and get some feedback. And I found the best way to get feedback as well for everybody who's listening was to give the application, maybe to just give the research impact and the leadership and the publications to some, and then the grant to others. So share the love a bit, share the load, and then book a Zoom appointment with them for 30 minutes. Don't ask them for comments on it, because sometimes that's too overwhelming for people. It's much easier for them to give big picture feedback in a shorter time frame.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So over to you, Jess. Back in the early stages, think of when you initially started, and then I suppose the most recent round, what you might have done that made a difference, perhaps, and then about feedback as well too.
So I suppose I want to start off by saying I got an investigator grant. I do not know how to get an investigator grant, which is to say that I don't think if I put that same application in again this round, would I be successful? I don't know. There is randomness in the system. But in any case, I will talk about what I did. So my approach starting out was similar to Kristy's, looking at examples, working out exactly what I needed to write was something I did. So I had a Word document where I wrote down all of the sections that needed to be filled in and what the word limits were for each of those, including things like the synopsis and the plain English summary. These are additional bits and pieces that you need to write that really you kind of forget about until right at the end. Things like the career context section, which is really important. So I started out that way. I consumed every bit of information I could. Similarly, the webinars and seminars available through Monash, I looked at all of those. I put together my draft application, and look, the first couple of years I put this in, I don't think I was very good about seeking feedback, and I think that's possibly why it didn't go very well. I didn't seek feedback particularly widely. Just a couple of people to look at it. I did in later years and the most recent application, so I did ask particular people to review particular sections, and that was incredibly helpful. I think asking people to review the whole thing is, as has already been said, a very daunting task. There's so much in these applications. Getting people who you think would provide particularly good advice on particular aspects of your application is really important.
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Both of you mentioned really targeting your people to review it to certain sections rather than overwhelming them and sort of get suboptimal feedback on the whole thing. So I think that's a really excellent point. And across to Kate, I just want to say, still no questions in Q&A. Please don't hesitate to ask anything at all, because it's a great opportunity to get some feedback from two successful applicants, and also Kate has an investigator grant too, so also 3. So across to you, Kate. And now we're going to go to the killer question, I think it is now, the main one about statisticians. How do statisticians trump themselves up to, I shouldn't say that word, how do statisticians talk themselves up to be competitive with people who've got a clinical focus, or, have got health outcome focus?
Yeah, just kind of linking that to the previous conversation. I think when you're getting particularly your project grant, the actual grant proposal reviewed, it's really important to get reviews from non-statisticians, because you end up with quite a lot of non-statisticians reviewing these. So checking it's accessible, understandable, makes sense to people who don't have a statistical background is important as well. I think when I did mine, I got feedback from different people with different backgrounds, because I found they gave me quite useful feedback in different directions. Okay, so next question. You often find in statistics it's quite hard to play up your evidence of leadership in terms of lead grants and lead papers, because by definition we're often supporting other applied research projects where the applied lead is typically the PI, the CI, the lead author. So how did you deal with trying to really, big up your leadership in that kind of area with that barrier? And this time we'll start with Jess, and we'll move on.
Yes, it's a great question. And I think for me, I have quite a lot of methodological publications on which I'm first author or senior author. So for me, it was about balancing, so in my top 10 publications, for example, balancing those publications with publications where I was the trial statistician on a. So for my lead author publications, it really is about trying to emphasize the impact that these publications do have on practice. So Kristy already mentioned going through Scopus and seeing who cited your work, how your work has been used, really digging into the details of how is your work being translated across into practice. Spent a lot of time trawling through various citations, counting up the number of participants in trials that have referenced my papers. Something else I often do with my methodological publications is include a Shiny app, so something that people can access online. The important thing to do with any Shiny app you have is to embed in it something that collects all of the metrics, something that collects data on who is visiting it, when they're visiting it, where they're from, how long they're spending on your app. And that can be, I found that to be really useful, including those statistics, that data in my application. So I think that those are some ways we can sort of capture impact.
Great, thanks,
Lovely.
Jess.
Quite a few of them are from me accessing your Shiny app, Jess.
Hey, that's great. If anyone else wants to, I'll put the link in the chat.
It's all about who you know, right? And spruiking your own work. And
getting your family to access it. And yeah.
Kristy, what are your tips and tricks?
So I guess I was a very different side where I have a lot of trials publications where I'm not lead author. Second sometimes, or a little bit further down the list at times. But luckily, very impactful, you know, clinical trials with international that have changed practice, which is fantastic. But in terms of lead authorship papers, only a few, and only recently. So not, you know, you need that time to be able to demonstrate impact. But luckily I'm going for EL1. So even though I did have a comment that on my top 10, I need more first author papers. That's okay at my level. So I did also have a little summary at the start of my impact section talking about how, as a trial statistician, you know, we all know that stats is essential and really driving the design of the trial and ensuring that, you know, the right design and the right, you know, the right innovative aspects are answering that clinical question. So I just had a little spiel about that at the start of my impact section as well. And then throughout my sections, I had various comments like, for example, you know, my contribution is invaluable as I improve the scientific credibility and facilitate publications in high impact and quality journals, you know, stuff like that, which is true, but it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn when I say that. But yeah, luckily so I focused my impact on 2 different clinical areas. So I'm spread across a lot of different clinical areas. And this was the hardest part for me to write. I don't have a stepped wedge nice little slot of things that go together. I felt very spread when I started thinking about this. And so I just honed in on the fact that I'm a trials statistician. That's what I do really well. And fortunately, it does not need to map with exactly what I want in my grant application. There needs to be obviously some synergy, but they can be a little bit separate. So I just honed on the fact that I'm a trials statistician. I'm very good at what I do. You know, these trials that I've been involved with have changed practice around the world. And, you know, these are the grants that have come out from those trials. And yeah, that's the kind of role that I ended up taking in this application.
So Kristy, can I just jump in there? What were the 2 areas that you said
Yeah.
you sort of focused on? Because I think this will be a key aspect, and I think for sort of clinical trial statisticians who are sort of spread widely and don't have particular clinical area, it might be a bit more difficult. But yes, what were your two there?
Definitely. So I ended up choosing neonatal and gynecological oncology. So in those two areas, I had a few New Englands, some Journal of Clinical Oncology, some really big impact papers. So I sort of started with there and kept referencing those two. So kind of in each impact section, I had like neonatal paragraph and then a gynae oncology paragraph.
Thanks, Kristy. Can I ask you another follow-up question? So you mentioned that your impact was a bit different to what your project was. So as you say, Jess had her project was clearly around step wedge trials and methodology. Your impact was around your applied work. So what was your grant application actually written around? Was it
risk prediction modeling?
So it was very methodology, it wasn't very clinically focused?
Yeah, so I split my grant up, as other successful applicants have, Kate, into a few different areas. One of them was methods, the other was application, and then the last kind of component was about building a biostats community resource, building up the next generation. So that's kind of how I framed the proposal. So while I did have methods in there was a lot of application and future biostat support.
Yeah, that sounds good. So Jess, yours, how was yours split up with your own? Was yours very methodologically focused, or did it have a bit of applied stuff in there too?
So I had sort of put together this, so my knowledge, so throughout all of my sections, I was all about the stepped wedge. So my publications were heavily skewed towards my research in cluster randomized trials. My impact was in my work in stepped wedge and cluster randomized trials. And then my knowledge gain section was on, similar to what's already been said, talking about the methods, but then how those methods will be used in practice and how we will ensure those methods are used in practice to develop, to answer real world clinical questions. Something I think it's important to keep in mind is that you need to do a really good job in all of the sections, but I think as statisticians, we may need to realize and recognize that perhaps our impact sections, they might not be what wins us the grant. We have to do well in those, but we might not be getting the 6s and 7s there. Maybe sometimes we are. I certainly wasn't. We need to be aiming to get those really high scores in that knowledge gain section and in the other sections. That, for me, was the strategy I took.
Yeah, that's a nice segue to a question from Michael Dimmock. Thanks, Michael, for asking a question. So how much focus or relative focus did you put on the research project or the methods section of the application compared to, say, the career, the impact and leadership sections? You could sort of attribute sort of percentage of effort roughly. So Jess, start with you.
Yeah, I think I spent way more time than is proportionally allocated to it in the scoring on the knowledge gain section. It was the part I found the most enjoyable to write. So that's partially why I spent most of my time there. And then after that, I did spend a lot of time on the impact sections because I knew that they were going to be weak, but I knew that because I knew they were going to be weak, I knew I needed to spend a lot of time there. Leadership and publications were less than those two. I think the impact section, I don't know about anyone else, but I do find it very confusing. You've got these 3 impact buckets. Splitting things up across those buckets is, I still don't know exactly how to do it.
Are you able to give, because I think this is a really critical part from having to talk to various people successful with investigator grants. So can you explain sort of broadly how you divvied up the impact across the 3? Is that, firstly, is that possible? A binary yes or no? Is the question too difficult there to be explaining sort of succinctly without getting into, exquisite detail?
So I guess I can sort of talk about the broad strategy I took. So you've got your research impact, your reach and significance. I took this to be sort of the broad stepped wedge, the particular areas of stepped wedge that I was looking at, what impact that has. Still very much talking about myself and what my group had done, but without sort of talking about me personally. Then there's the program contribution section, and this is where I sort of talked about more of what my group had done and my collaborators, naming us specifically. And then the applicant contribution was more directly naming me, like I did all of this. Look, I'll be honest with you, I got 5.4s for all of those. I did not do great. So I'd be curious to hear what someone else has done there.
Yeah, Kristy. Thanks, Jess. Kristy, how did you find those three?
I was told by somebody else to write the publications first. So do your top 10 publication draft first, then to do your impact. And when you're writing the impact section, you start with your contribution. And then you go to the program's contribution, and then at the end you go to the reach and significance. So that's how I wrote my first draft. And I spent a lot more time on the 70% than 70%. So I'm like, Jess, I left the grant for future Kristy's problem. And I was just like, because I knew that was where I was going to struggle, is writing about me and how amazing I am. And so I focused a lot of my time and energy there. And I got really good marks for the reach and significance. Less so for the research program, but that's probably because I don't have any people in my research program as an EL1. And then it was really funny. I got a 5.2 for leadership, but in all of the comments, everybody said that relative to opportunity, I've got outstanding leadership. So that's really funny that what they say doesn't really align with what the mark is. But I got over the line, so maybe all of this doesn't matter. Yeah.
So how did you frame your three sections? You were saying before you mainly were sort of a collaborative clinical trialist.
Yeah, so my contribution, I was talking about, what I brought to the trials, what I advised on, what I supervise people to do various aspects, and like quality of life papers, etc. Those bits and pieces, and then I'm now on CI on grants from that as well. Then the next section, the research program. So that was focusing on how, so one of the baby trials was on cord clamping. So focusing on how cord clamping fits into the baby, cord management practices in that space. And then, of course, the last one was the reach and significance of those trials and how they've changed practice.
Okay.
Andrew, can I chip in here?
Yeah, no, please.
These sections are so hard to write, and as both these two are saying, it's hard to even know where to start or what to put in there. Like I know when I was doing mine a couple of years ago, I had no idea where to start. So getting advice from others about where to start. We've got a great guy at MCRI who just kind of talks you through what's meant to go in those boxes, how you make that story. And his feedback on my first draft of that was invaluable, because I wasn't even selling it right. I mean, I wrote mine around methodology, I wrote mine around missing data, and trying to talk about the impact of developing methods for missing data and how you show that. I just had no idea. So getting advice on how to frame those boxes and what they're even looking for in those boxes is really helpful if you can get it, just by talking to other people and who've been through it before, I think.
think the first thing that you need to do is you just need to get everything down somewhere. And then when other people are reviewing it, and when you're reviewing it again, you'll be like, oh, actually, that doesn't fit there. It actually fits better up there in that story. But it isn't until you have it all down in front of you that you can actually, but writing it down is the hardest part, I think. And another piece of advice that I was told is to use PubMed IDs. So don't use DOIs or anything. PubMed IDs are only like 8 characters or something. And when you're referencing grant applications, reference the grant number. So you're trying to use as few spaces, as few characters as possible, because the character limit is also a killer.
Yeah, good suggestion. And Kristy, you also mentioned the word story. I think when you're putting these together, making your career sound like a story, you know, making sure all the boxes, as you said about the 3 boxes and starting from the bottom up, you know, making sure that that all tells one story, I think is quite important. It makes the grant easier to read and understand, which, you know, it can be part of the problem, especially with methodology grants.
And that was the hardest thing for me, was trying to write the story, because I looked at all of my publications and I'm like, I see no cohesion. I see no story. I see random things that I've done. So yeah, trying to pull it into a story was was the hardest part.
So both of you sort of, I want to focus, instead of on the great things you've done, I want to focus on the lows and how you got yourselves out of the trough. Like Kristy, you've talked about some parts are so daunting, where do you start? So what was your strategy to be able to get through the really tough times there without thinking you'd want to change jobs and become a stop and go sign holder?
Well, funny you should say that, because after I'd actually submitted it, I'd already resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't be successful, because it's a lottery, right? I feel like there's some lottery aspect. You've got to get over a certain benchmark, and then it's just a free-for-all. But I'd already resigned to myself to it, that I wouldn't be successful this year. And then if I wasn't successful next year, I was never going again. Because one of the seminars that I went to, someone was there and she was successful on her 4th time as well, Jess. But the 4th time was when she got professional writers in to write her impact sections for her, which is available if anybody would like to pay for it. Their services are widely available on the internet, and they write investigator grants for people. Yeah. Sorry, what was, so getting through the lows? Yeah, I think the hardest, I mean, I found the hardest thing was just starting, and I would just start putting words on the paper. I'd give myself 20 minutes and then I'd move on to coding or something else that I like doing. So I just try and do little bits at a time until I had enough there that I could actually work with it.
Yeah, so just doing a little bit just to make some progress without putting too much pressure in. I've got to complete this whole section. Is that sort of like chunking it, like doing little chunks? Just get something down.
And then I really left the grant application probably a bit late, and just kind of didn't get as much feedback on that. But I got a 5.6, so I didn't do too bad for that.
And Jess, how was it being unsuccessful 3 times? I'm sure it wasn't marvelous.
It was great fun. It was really, the first couple of times it wasn't wonderful. It didn't feel good. But I applied in 2019. So there were 2 rounds in 2019. I was unsuccessful in both of those. And then I didn't apply again until 2023 in the investigator grant round. So in the meantime, I was writing ideas grants, putting in discovery projects, doing other things, writing other. So I think I've had there's been a lot of failure over the past few years. And I think what has helped me to get through it is just experiencing more of it, experiencing more of the not getting it, and just realizing that that's just what happens. And yeah, okay, be upset, be sad for a few days. I mean, it started out, you get the grant outcomes letter, you open it up, and I was, quite upset the first couple of times that happened. Now when I get those, you haven't been successful, it's okay, it's like an hour. It still hurts, of course, but you kind of realize that it's part of the system. Yeah. So I think for me, it's just been putting myself out there more and more and more, getting knocked back more and more and more has thickened my skin.
When you hear the dire success rates for these grants, I mean, you've got to expect to be knocked back a couple of times to be the lucky, Kristys of the world who get up first time. But I think, the success rates are unfortunately not very high. So
I think for some people too, like for me, I was lucky because I would still have a job if I didn't get it. For some people, they're not in such a lucky situation. They need the investigator grant in order to remain doing what they're doing. So it's really tough. I think of course the funding system, it's entirely underfunded. It's NHMRC and ARC alike, but we're not here to discuss that, I suppose.
So that's a whole nother can of worms. So Andrew, I was going to jump. I might ask Gary's question. So
yeah,
Gary's
please. Yeah,
question
this is a great question.
Chat.
Yeah,
I feel like it's very related. So the question is, how do I know if I'm ready to be competitive to apply? Do you have any guidance around number of publications or number as first author or corresponding author, or is it impact factors, or how do you even decide whether to go for it or not? Do you want to start, Kristy, maybe?
Well, I guess I didn't know that I was ready, except other people were telling me I should apply. And of course, as soon as I started telling people that I was thinking about applying, everybody would say, it's really low success rate. You probably won't be successful. And then I had a lot of people tell me that they've given up. They don't go for them anymore because they've had this many rejections or whatever. So I was very resigned to the fact that I wouldn't be successful. And I remember it was a Wednesday afternoon when we got our letter last time, and my son was already home from school. He's at kindy. And all of a sudden I was screaming at the computer and he was like, what's happened? And I was trying to explain to a 5-year-old, I've got a new job, but it's not really a new job. It's kind of the same job. And no, mum's not going to get any extra money for this, but I get to do what I want, kind of. So that was really nice, but it was kind of life back to normal very quickly because you've got all of this other work that's back on top of your shoulders.
Yeah. So asked Kristy how she celebrated that night. She said, "Oh, I had to go back and cook dinner for the family." So that was...
Husband didn't come home from work till 7:30, so I didn't do anything exciting until the weekend.
So Jess, same question to you then about
how do you know if you're ready? Look, I think a good thing to do is look at there are statements of expectations at each level. So looking at those statement of expectations that the NHMRC puts out and working out, first of all, what level you would be applying at. I think that's an important thing to consider. Talking to people about it, talking to maybe your supervisor or your boss or a close colleague, someone who knows you and your career well. That's something that is helpful. Trying to look at examples of successful applications at the level at which you would be applying is, that's a standard piece of advice. But at the same time, you need to remember that when people write these applications, they are putting their very best foot forward. They are shining things up. They are making things look like $1 million. So reading those applications, but taking them with a grain of salt is important.
Taking that feedback.
Look into your heart and you'll know if you're ready or not.
Just coming back to the
Andrew, can I just add, I was going to add, you've got to be in it to win it. Like, you know, as Kristy says, she thought it was definitely a no, didn't even consider the idea she might get it, but you can be pleasantly surprised. And because there is that kind of element of luck in there, you know, if you don't even try, you'll never know. And yeah, the downside is obviously the time it takes to put the application together, but I don't feel like the time is completely wasted. You know, if you don't get it this year, you've got a starting point for next year when you've got a bit more of a track record, and you're not starting, as Kristy said, getting words on a page is half the battle. So if you've got a draft from a previous year, you can often read it and see where you could improve it. So that's a much better starting point for future applications, even in different rounds. You know, it doesn't have to be for the investigator grant rounds, but just the thought of trying to do it does pull together the relevant bits for anything you apply for in the future. So I'm a big believer in you've got to be in it to win it.
Okay, I just want
I
to.
think it's the framework for academic promotion almost. If you're trying to do an investigator grant and a promotion in the same year, you could probably cross-use a lot of the work.
Yeah, it varies across universities, but certainly at Monash, they are very, very similar. You could reuse a lot. So Jess, can I just touch on that point? How useful was the feedback you received from unsuccessful ones in changing things for later, given everyone has a subjective probability of the decision being random?
So in 2019, the first couple of rounds that I applied in, you didn't receive any feedback apart from your scores. So that was, you know, it indicated which areas were weakest, I suppose. Then 2023, the first round, there was some useful feedback in there, but again, it was really, for me, Kate mentioned this, looking back at those applications, I could see where things weren't very strong. I could see where I had worded things in a suboptimal way. So one example is one of the leadership sections. So I've had quite a significant leadership role within the Statistical Society of Australia. And I led the society like through the pandemic. And I looked at what I had written for my leadership section for my last unsuccessful application. And it did not communicate at all what it had taken to do that. So it was immediately clear to me that I needed to completely reword what I'd said there. It was that time. I really need a lot of time and distance away from what I've written to see the flaws. And having an unsuccessful application, an unsuccessful round, it gives you that time and that distance to go back and reflect.
In the question, though, they sort of asked sort of more concrete things about number of publications at first author. So both of you're in different categories there. Suggest most of it were, say, your top 10 publications.
10 publications. I had 7 methodological, 3 trials publications. Of the 7 methodological, I think I was first or senior on 5 of them and second on 2. One of those ones that I was second on 2 was the paper that Carla Hemming led on the Shiny CRT app. So this is a paper that's had a lot of impact.
Yeah, it's all part of the same story. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And Kristy? Yeah.
I had 5 trials papers across a couple in the New England and JCO and Lancet. And then I had 4 follow-up or secondary analyses of trials that I'd led. So I was first author on those or co-first author on those. And then 1 methods paper. So I did manage to have a few, but those ones where I was first author on had only been published in the last couple of years. So there wasn't really great impact yet from those.
Yeah, I was going to ask, that's exactly the question I was going to ask later. In the choice of the sort of top 10 publications, you might think, oh, great, this great first author paper, but it's only a year old, so it hasn't really had time to have an impact. Did the sort of recency come into your decision making about which to include?
Definitely. I didn't feel like I could put 10 trials publications in there. There where I wasn't first author, I felt like I needed the cream of the crop and then a few showcasing that I can lead work and then a stats methods kind of had to go in there to show that. But the problem is the time for stats methods papers, right? I've been trying to publish one for like over 3 years. There's a huge lead time in the work, let alone the publication of that paper, and then the impact.
Yeah, Andrew, can I add something too?
Yeah.
You know, it's important to have those high impact publications, but I think it's nice if each publication can kind of tell a different piece of the story. So, you know, you need, if you're going to make that story, you're a trial statistician, but you're also, you know, working in methodology, you kind of need the different paper to show those different things. And it's kind of helpful to show you're still publishing sort of papers now. So the recency thing, as long as you point it out and don't have them all as very recent publications, I feel like getting that breadth is important.
I would agree with that. And it's also my papers kind of led into each other. So it was like one was the main trial publication, and then the next was the follow-up work that I led. And then, do you know what I mean? Like they're kind of paired together or somehow joined up to make a story in some way.
And just to the audience now, we don't have any more questions in Q&A, but I'm sure you have questions. So please, we've only got a few minutes left. So please do ask any question, whatever's on your mind regarding submitting applications. So please take this opportunity. Okay, Kristy, complete the following sentence. After hitting submit for the application, I thought to myself, if I get this grant, I will ... complete. What did you think right at that time?
Well, I guess maybe not after hitting submit, but after actually getting the grant. About an hour later, I was at soccer training with my son, and I was like, I'm actually have to deliver something on this in 5 years' time, because when you go into Sapphire after just having received the grant like an hour before, there's already a time frame of when your report is due. Did you see that, Jess? Because that was the first thing I was like, oh, I have to submit this report in the future of what I've actually done in the next 5 years. It hasn't even started yet. That was really a little bit overwhelming. But in terms of after I hit submit, I don't think there was anything. I was just grateful it was submitted in time, because there was the university actually wanted it 2 weeks before it was submitted to NHMRC, but I had these problems with letters and changing FTE and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't actually submit mine to the research office until the day it was due. And I was just freaking out that it wasn't going to go through in time until at 5 o'clock, because it had to go through the research office. That's all.
And Jess, when hitting submit, you thought, if I get this...
It was more about what would happen when I didn't get it, to be honest. When this is not successful, I'll have to write it again. What can I improve next time? I was just so used to the failure, so I didn't even dare to dream. So I thought, if I get this, I won't have to write another one of these for a few years, and won't that be nice?
So the moral of the story is, do dare to dream. We have a question from Daisy. Do you have any advice on how to get to a place where you feel ready to apply for a grant? And sort of covered that. I'm very early in my career and would love to hear how you advocated. Okay, so this is a really important part. How you advocated to get first author methodological papers out, as well as collaborating with clinicians, that is trial statistician, to sort of move beyond the second, third, fourth, fifth author that on collaborative work, to be able to maybe like throw to Kristy about becoming first author on some secondary publications, etc. So maybe to Kristy.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I feel like it's only really become an option after I have a PhD behind me, and probably a little bit more confidence in meetings to talk up about what I feel. But it does depend on the group of researchers that you're working with. So I find that some clinicians are really thinking about their mentorship, and they're seeing you as someone that they're mentoring. And then that's where I have got onto co-first papers. And also when you're talking about the project like a trial and they're thinking about the main paper, maybe have a chat to the principal investigator on, you know, I was thinking about how maybe I could lead this project in the future after we've done the main paper. You know, how about we do a mediation analysis, or how about we do you know, a comparison of different methods, something like that, where it's kind of in the ECMR space where you're using a new method or you're comparing a few different methods. You're not really maybe developing a new method, but you're kind of able to use the trials data sets to demonstrate that.
Just adding in my sort of personal experience with that, and so a number of people have sort of gone down that path. The clinical, well, particularly the clinical researchers, maybe there's a high profile paper, they might be hesitant to use a different method, allow use of a different method in case the answer differs. So choosing an outcome that is not of the main interest in the first paper might be a better avenue, where for the methodology, it doesn't matter if it's the main outcome of the paper or another one.
Yes, that's a good point.
Same.
So I suppose I've been lucky in that for a few years now, part of my position has explicitly been in the development of methodology. So it's been about not letting other priorities bleed into that time. So working with clinicians, teaching, everything else. It's been about really quarantining the time to work on my own papers, and really badgering co-authors to provide their comments on those so that they can get submitted as soon as possible. And sometimes only having one or two other co-authors on those papers to really expedite the process.
Sounds lovely. Big groups of people need more and more time. You're right.
We're just about out of time, but Kristy and Jess, sort of any closing words of encouragement for those considering applying?
I had some feedback from a researcher that wasn't a statistician. They really fine-tuned some of the words, and they really like de-statsed a lot of my grant proposal. So I would really advocate for some of that. I didn't take all of their feedback on board because I thought that you need some level of statistical knowledge there. Otherwise you seem like you're just waving your arms. Trust me, I'm a doctor. But I think some level of that is useful, but definitely be taking all of the feedback with a grain of salt, and it's yours in the end. So make sure you're happy with it.
Great advice.
And Jess?
My final piece of advice would be, don't get discouraged. It seems very daunting when you start out, and then if you're lucky enough to be successful, wonderful. If it takes you a few goes, you just need to keep trying and keep pushing. Failure hurts, but it begins to sting some less as you go.
Oh,
Try again, Jess.
Yes, and I like the sting element too there. Sorry,
thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoy these kind of informal chat sessions. I know we enjoy putting them together. There will be a survey that will be circulated, and also this was being recorded, so this can be passed on to your friends and colleagues. But if you have ideas for future topics or people you'd like to hear from, please bob it in the survey or drop us an email at STInG, and we will take that feedback on board. Anything else, Andrew?
I would like to thank Vivian and Sarah from ACTA for setting this session up, and the nice WebEx platform we've got for this. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, and a huge thanks to Jess and Kristy for their valuable insights in the grant application, which I hope you guys out there will find useful. I'm sure I will for my next application. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Kate.
Till next time.
Bye. Thanks for having us.